Russia prepares to announce its victory over Ukraine and NATO on the 24th of February. Ukrainian intelligence reports how U.S. Secretary of State calls Europeans to reassure them after U.S. talks with Russians, and why bill on full withdrawal from yuan introduced in U.S. Congress. That is news next. The Russians are preparing to announce an alleged victory in the war against Ukraine and NATO on the 3-year anniversary of their full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, and are planning a large-scale propaganda disinformation campaign, reported by Defense Intelligence of Ukraine.
Russia is preparing to declare an alleged victory in the war against Ukraine by the specific date, 24th of February, 2025, the third anniversary of the beginning of the full-scale war. Moreover, these plans may also include a Russian victory over NATO.
About details, the Russians have consistently claimed that they are fighting the alliance in Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence said that the Kremlin had instructed to intensify attempts to sow disillusionment among Ukrainians, destabilize the situation in the country, and discredit Ukraine in the eyes of partners who provide important military assistance. Statements such as "the West betrayed Ukraine," "neither Moscow nor Washington care about the opinions of Europeans and Ukrainians," "the US and Russia made a deal behind Ukrainians' back," "the Ukrainian government is illegitimate," "the Ukrainian army is losing on the battlefield," and "corrupt Ukrainian officials are stealing billions of dollars of US aid" will be the most widespread narratives in the near future. The Kremlin has ordered its intelligence services to use the US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia on the 18th of February for information attacks. They will try to manipulate these events to influence public opinion. The New York Times has reported that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been privately trying to reassure European countries concerned about the U.S. side's direct contact with Russia during the recent meeting in Riyadh, reported by European Pravda citing the New York Times. Details: the newspaper has reported on the results of a phone conversation between the U.S. Secretary of State and officials from the UK, France, Germany, and Italy based on information in its possession. The New York Times reported that Rubio had tried to reassure Europe that the talks in Saudi Arabia were not a drastic shift from US policy, as many had feared. Speaking to European officials, the Secretary of State pointed out that the meeting was more of a first step in the process, a test to see if the Kremlin was serious about reaching a deal. Rubio told the Europeans that the Trump administration does not plan to impose the terms of any bilateral agreements with Russia on Ukraine and Europe. He also stated that the US administration would not lift US sanctions against Russia without a noticeable change in Moscow's behavior, although he did not rule out a limited easing of some measures if the Russians begin to take the steps the administration is seeking. Rubio acknowledged that the Trump administration has gained a clear understanding that Russia may try to use the talks to sow division in the West or to reduce its own isolation in the international arena. The newspaper notes that Rubio's message to European officials after the meeting in Riyadh was more subtle and conciliatory than the public statements made by some members of Trump's team. Part of the call was devoted to explaining why Ukrainians and Europeans were not included in the Riyadh talks. Rubio explained that the United States did so because most of the conversation focused on bilateral issues between the United States and Russia. This included opening a discussion about lifting restrictions on their embassies, which were de facto closed in both countries. Rubio said that talks between US and Russian officials on lifting these diplomatic restrictions would be the first test of Russia's intentions. According to Rubio, a failure to negotiate an embassies would show that the Kremlin is not serious about negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. He also told the Europeans that he could not say on the basis of this one meeting whether the Russians were serious about concluding a peace deal, but he said they had given enough signs that it was possible to warrant further discussions. Rubio concluded by promising that to keep US allies informed and calling for unity. The British Foreign Secretary David Lammy does not believe Russia is striving for peace with Ukraine. He reached this conclusion after hearing Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's speech at a closed meeting of G20 diplomats in South Africa, informs Reuters. Lammy noted that the meeting of foreign ministers from the world's largest economies was overshadowed by a dispute among G20 members regarding the war in Ukraine.
We have not got anywhere near a negotiated settlement. And I have to say, when I listen to what the Russians and what Lavrov has just said in the chamber, February 20th, Riyadh, this afternoon, I don't see an appetite to really get to that peace.
He said, responding to a question about whether London would support the introduction of peacekeepers into Ukraine under any circumstances, in the absence of security guarantees from the US, peacekeepers for Ukraine and defense spending. The media also reminded that on February 17th, at a meeting of European leaders in Paris, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that the US commitment to security is the only way to ensure lasting peace in Ukraine. He stated that it is currently too early to discuss how many British peacekeepers he could send. At this meeting, European leaders discussed but did not reach any agreement on deploying peacekeepers. Instead, they promised to strengthen their defense capabilities as the Trump administration seems to increasingly adopt the Kremlin's stance on Ukraine.
This is a critical moment. It's essential for Europe to increase defense spending, to step up our commitment to our own defenses across Europe.
He also confirmed the UK's goals of spending 2.5% of its GDP on defense and pledged support for Ukraine. We're committed to giving Ukraine $3 billion a year for as long as it lasts, he said. The agency also reminded that last week, Trump shocked European allies by calling Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to discuss ending the war without prior consultations with Ukraine or them.
We look forward to speaking to President Trump more about this, Ukraine talks. We're very, very clear. There must be a role for Ukraine. It must be at the heart of these negotiations.
A draft law has been introduced in the US Congress proposing the withdrawal of the United States from the UN, reported by Fox News as reported by European Pravda. About details, Republican Senator Mark Lee from Utah has introduced a bill to completely withdraw the United States from the UN in 2025, providing for the country's withdrawal from the UN and all related agencies and the termination of funding for their activities. It is also known that Republican Chip Roy from Texas wants to introduce such a bill in the House of Representatives.
The United Nations has devolved into a platform for tyrants and a venue to attack America and her allies. We should stop paying for it. As President Trump revolutionizes our foreign policy by putting America first, we should withdraw from this sham organization and prioritize real alliances that keep our country safe and prosperous.
Chip Roy argues that the UN does nothing. Despite all of the money and the attention, this corrupt globalist organization has for decades failed to prevent wars, genocides, human rights violations, and even pandemics, he said, specifically recalling the scandal with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees, some of whose employees may have been involved in the Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023. About a dozen other Republicans have expressed support for the draft law. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe.